Pre-election polls had said the race was too close to call. Donald Trump, however, defied expectations, securing more than the 270 Electoral College votes needed to win before dawn, and leading Democrat Kamala Harris by about 5 million votes in the popular count. So how did he pull it off? Firstly, he was running at a time when Americans are frustrated by high prices and, to a lesser extent, illegal immigration across the U.S. southern border.
We need a better economy, control inflation.
To secure our borders, to help our economy.
The national exit poll of voters conducted by Edison Research showed 3/4 of voters think the country is going in a negative direction. Of those voters, 61% went for Trump. And of the self-described angry voters, 71 backed the Republican. For voters who most worried about the economy, 79% voted for Trump. Even when it came to the issue of abortion, of those who believe it should be a legal procedure in most instances, only 51% backed Harris compared to 47% for Trump. That suggests Trump's efforts to blur his position worked to negate one of the Democrats' largest advantages. Trump said he opposed a federal abortion ban, but that states are free to pass laws on the issue. He also became a vocal advocate for insurers to cover in vitro fertilization or IVF treatments. While black women overwhelmingly supported Harris, polls showed Trump had a slight edge over her with suburban white women voters. Overall, Harris won 54% of the female vote. That's less than Biden's 57% in 2020. Trump's campaign had focused on pulling in male voters, especially young men, through social media, sports, podcasts, and online gaming. The Republican edged Harris among men aged 18 to 44 and claimed a decisive chunk of those 45 and up. The Trump campaign had put a great deal of effort into winning over black and Latino voters. In North Carolina, exit polls showed Trump boosting his share of the black ballot to 12% from 5% in 2020. He also made major gains with Latino voters in swing states like Nevada and Arizona, especially among the men. That helped make up for Trump losing some white voter support compared with 2020.
While I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign.
U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris delivered a concession speech to the nation on Wednesday at her alma mater, Howard University in Washington, D.C. She pledged to continue fighting for women's rights and against gun violence, and to, quote, fight for the dignity that all people deserve. Harris also said she had called President-elect Donald Trump to congratulate him on his victory, and promised to engage in a peaceful transfer of power, evoking memories of the assault by his supporters on the U.S. Capitol at the end of Trump's first presidency.
A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. In our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States.
Harris rose to the top of the Democratic ticket in July after President Joe Biden stepped aside and brought newfound enthusiasm and cash to the campaign. But she struggled to overcome voters' concerns about the economy and immigration. Anger and soul-searching took hold of the Democratic Party a day after her election loss, with the sharpest criticism including accusations that the party had lied to its supporters about Biden's mental fitness. Thousands gathered at the historically black college on Tuesday night for what they hoped would be an unprecedented victory. They came back on Wednesday to show their support after her loss. Here's Harris supporter Jamila Joseph.
We're feeling sad about the overall outcome, but I want to continue to show support for this really great campaign that she ran.
Harris said she understood her supporters' disappointment, but encouraged them, especially young people, not to give up.
On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win.
Given us an unprecedented and powerful mandate.
With his return to the White House now secured, US President-elect Donald Trump has a list of people he says he wants to prosecute or investigate. They include political rivals, left-wing Americans, and tech giants. So who could Trump target? Trump has called for investigations into Vice President Kamala Harris, President Joe Biden, former President Barack Obama, and former Republican US Representative Liz Cheney. At a September rally, Trump said Harris was responsible for the biggest crime story of our time, referring to illegal border crossings.
She should be impeached and prosecuted for her actions.
He has also posted online calling for military tribunals for Cheney and Obama. Following pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses across the US this year, Trump told Fox News anyone who desecrates the American flag should get a 1-year jail sentence. He also said he would ban refugee resettlements from, quote, terror-infested areas such as Gaza and arrest pro-Hamas thugs who engage in vandalism, in apparent reference to the college student protesters. Trump has also warned Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Google over what he says is potential election interference on their platforms. He's accused Zuckerberg's Meta of suppressing content that would have hurt Biden in the 2020 election, while Trump has also threatened to instruct the Department of Justice to criminally investigate Google for only displaying bad stories about him.
This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt.
Trump and his allies have called for prosecuting, firing, or jailing prosecutors who defy him or have investigated him. In an April interview with Time, he said if US attorneys refused orders to prosecute someone, he would be open to firing them.
Today, an indictment was unsealed.
He also says he would fire the federal prosecutor who is leading current criminal probes against him.
For much of this year, Donald Trump has faced 4 simultaneous prosecutions over allegations ranging from trying to cover up a hush money payment to porn star Stormy Daniels to attempting to overturn his 2020 election defeat. He pleaded not guilty to all charges and cast the prosecutions as politically motivated. So what happens now that he's won the US election? Trump faced 4 charges in federal court in Washington. He was accused of spreading false claims of election fraud to try to block the collection and certification of votes following the 2020 election. He was also charged with unlawfully holding onto classified documents after his first term ended in 2021 and obstructing efforts by the US government to retrieve the records.
Is one of the most outrageous and vicious legal theories ever put forward in an American court of law.
However, all charges were dismissed in July after US Special Counsel Jack Smith, who led the federal prosecutions in that case, was found to have been improperly appointed to the role and did not have the authority to bring the case. Smith's team is appealing to the ruling, but Trump's vow to fire Smith immediately upon taking office likely signals the end of the case. In May, a New York jury found Trump guilty of falsifying business records tied to the Daniels payment. That makes him the first former US president convicted of a felony. His sentencing is currently scheduled for November 26, before he's sworn in. Trump's lawyers are expected to ask Justice Juan Merchan to delay the sentencing, in which he could face up to 4 years in prison. Merchan has already twice postponed Trump's sentencing. That was in part due to a July US Supreme Court ruling finding that presidents have broad immunity from prosecution over their official acts. Based on the ruling, Trump argues the case should be dismissed. He has vowed to appeal his conviction once he's sentenced. Separately, his lawyers have asked the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to move the case to federal court. Such a move, if successful, could create new legal obstacles for the case. Last year, prosecutors in Georgia's Fulton County used state racketeering laws to charge Trump in an alleged conspiracy to reverse his defeat in the 2020 election.
The election was a rigged election, a stolen election.
Trump will not be able to end the prosecution, but his lawyer will seek to pause any activity related to him. They will argue that a president should not face the burden of a criminal prosecution while in office. Legal experts expect that the case against Trump will not progress while he remains in the White House. All in all, His US presidential election victory essentially ends the criminal cases brought against him. That is, at least during his term in office.
Truly be the golden age of America. That's what we have to have.
Trump 2.0 winners and losers whipped up global markets on Wednesday. In Europe, the pan-European Stock 600 index jumped over 1.5%, on track for its biggest single-day leap this year. Leading the march were the so-called Trump trades, or the stocks which could benefit from Trump's White House. He's seen as bullish for European defence stocks due to his warnings to scale back US military support in the region. Trump also wants to force NATO members to spend 2% or more of their GDP on defence. An index of Europe's aerospace and defence companies jumped 2.7% to a record high. Bitcoin surged to a fresh record, banking on a softer line on cryptocurrency regulation. But shares in European renewable energy companies were under pressure. Trump has said he'll scrap offshore wind projects through an executive order on his first day in office. In Asian markets, there was also a mixed bag reaction. The Shanghai Composite Index closed down nearly 1%. Trump has pledged previously to impose tariffs of 60% or more on Chinese imports and 10 to 20% on all other foreign goods. Japan's Nikkei closed up 2.61%, bolstered by chip and defence stocks. Meanwhile, in South Korea, the benchmark Kospi closed down over 0.5%. With many of the world's trade-dependent economies based in Asia, a Trump win could lead to major uncertainty in the region. Later this week, investors will turn their attention to the US Federal Reserve and the Bank of England's rate decisions. Trump's policies on immigration, tax and tariffs are generally viewed as inflationary, which could prompt higher US interest rates.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz sacked his finance minister on Wednesday, collapsing the ruling coalition and paving the way for a snap election. The political chaos in Europe's largest economy comes just hours after Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election.
I feel forced to take this step in order to avert damage to our country. We need a government capable of acting that has the force to take the necessary actions for our country. That's what was important to me in the past 3 years. That's what's important to me now.
Scholz is now expected to head a minority government with his Social Democrats and the Greens, the second largest party. He would have to rely on cobbled together parliamentary majorities to pass legislation. He plans to hold a parliamentary confidence vote in his government on January 15th. The collapse of Scholz's three-way alliance comes after months of wrangling over budget policy and Germany's economic direction. Scholz said he fired Christian Lindner of the Free Democrats Party for his obstructive behavior on budget disputes. He accused the minister of putting party before country.
Especially today, on a day with such an important event such as the U.S. election, such egotism is completely incomprehensible.
The government crisis comes at a critical juncture for Germany. It's facing a flatlining economy, aging infrastructure, and an unprepared military. All the while, the government's popularity is sinking, and far-right and far-left forces are surging. A political shakeup could fuel growing frustration with Germany's mainstream parties. That could benefit younger populist movements, including the anti-immigrant Alternative for Germany.
Cuba's national electrical grid collapsed Wednesday as Hurricane Rafael slammed into the island. The state-run grid operator blamed high winds for knocking out power to the entire population of 10 million people, the second such incident in less than a month. Cubans in the capital city Havana sheltered from violent gusts and rain, some struggling against the force of the winds.
It's a bit dangerous. I was crossing the street, and if I hadn't held on tight to this little piece here, it would have thrown me to the ground.
The U.S. National Hurricane Center warned of a life-threatening storm surge, damaging hurricane-force winds and flash flooding across much of western Cuba. The capital of 2 million people is especially vulnerable, with its densely packed homes and poor infrastructure. Schools, public transport and flights were suspended until further notice. Officials say they evacuated more than 100 Canadian tourists from a popular beach destination. Farm provinces producing Cuba's prized tobacco for hand-rolled cigars are expected to take a near-direct hit from the hurricane. And the timing could not be worse for the communist-run island. Just last month, it suffered another total collapse of its national electrical grid, which left the country without power for several days. The country's oil-fired power plants are obsolete and struggle to keep the lights on. Energy output has also been hit as oil imports from Venezuela, Russia, and Mexico have dwindled this year. Forecasters predict Rafael will spin off towards the western Gulf of Mexico later this week, though the track remains uncertain.
In all likelihood, 2024 will be the new record-breaking year. Not only that, but it's very likely, well, virtually certain now, that it will exceed the 1.5 threshold for the first time. So last year, we kept the temperature below 1.5 just by a small margin. We were 148. And we have been above that threshold throughout the year. So in order to keep it below 1.5, we will really need to see 2 impossible months of basically zero anomaly. So we do expect the temperature to shoot above 1.5 significantly, so in more than a tenth of a degree, so to speak. We are bound to see more and more exceedances at the annual level. So this is the first. It won't be the last. It will be every single year. It will become more likely for the temperature to pass the 1.5 threshold, and eventually, in 5-10 years' time, basically every single year will be above 1.5.